It is 2006 when a man walks into a convenience store in Florida. He buys a lottery ticket, but then suddenly, everything changes. The numbers match. He has just won a $30 million jackpot. Friends call him the luckiest man alive. But as the money pours in, so do the people who want a piece of it. One of them is the woman managing his money, who was already planning where to bury him. This is the story of Abraham Shakespeare, the lottery winner whose biggest mistake was trusting the wrong person. Abraham Shakespeare wasn't supposed to win anything. He grew up in Frostproof, Florida, a small town where the biggest industry was citrus groves, and the biggest aspiration was a steady paycheck. Abraham worked manual labor jobs most of his adult life. He had a criminal record, a limited education, and by most accounts could barely read or write. But in 2006, he bought a lottery ticket in Polk County, Florida, and matched all 6 numbers. The jackpot was $30 million. He took the lump sum, $17 million after taxes. For a man who had spent his entire life scraping together rent money, $17 million was an incomprehensible number. But here's what most people don't know about Abraham's win. He almost didn't get credit for it. A co-worker named Michael Ford claimed Abraham had used his money to buy the ticket and demanded a share of the winnings. Abraham fought the claim and won, but that legal battle was just the opening act. What followed would make that dispute look minor by comparison. Abraham was generous almost to a fault. People who knew him said he couldn't say no. Friends would ask for $5,000 and he'd hand over $10,000. Strangers approached him in parking lots and he'd peel off bills without asking questions. Within 2 years of winning, neighbors noticed his house wasn't getting bigger. It was getting quieter. The money was supposed to change Abraham Shakespeare's life, but it changed the people around him first. Within weeks of the win becoming public, Abraham's phone didn't stop ringing. People he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered they were close. Cousins he'd never met showed up at his door with stories about shared history that Abraham barely recognized. Old classmates who'd ignored him for decades were now his best friends, his confidants, his family. Abraham didn't turn them away. He bought cars for family members. He paid off people's mortgages. He signed checks for church donations and youth programs and neighbors he barely knew. He handed out cash like it was change from a gas station transaction, and he did it because that was genuinely who Abraham Shakespeare was. One estimate suggested he gave away or was pressured into giving away more than $2 million in the first year alone. But here's the detail that most coverage leaves out. Abraham started to feel trapped by his own generosity. He told people close to him that he wished he'd never won, that the money hadn't brought him peace. It had brought him a crowd. He couldn't go to a grocery store without someone recognizing him and asking for help. He couldn't sit at a family dinner without someone sliding a handwritten note across the table with a dollar amount on it. Florida required Abraham's name and image to be made public the moment he claimed the prize. There was no anonymity option, no buffer between Abraham Shakespeare and every person in Polk County who now knew his face. He started telling people he wanted to disappear, that he wanted to go somewhere nobody knew who he was, that winning the lottery had cost him the one thing he'd always had, the ability to walk through the world without being watched. He started skipping public events. He started avoiding the streets near his home. He was a man who had won everything and felt like he had lost the ability to simply exist without consequence. He started looking for a way out, not from the money, from the people. And that search for relief is exactly what made him vulnerable to the person who would walk into his life next. Dee Dee Moore went by Dee Dee. She was a businesswoman from Brandon, Florida, or at least that's how she presented herself. In reality, her financial history was a trail of failed ventures, bad debts, and civil court filings that told a very different story. She had declared bankruptcy. She had been named in multiple lawsuits. She owed money she had no clear mechanism for repaying. At the time she approached Abraham Shakespeare, she was not a financially stable woman looking to help someone else get stable. She was a woman in serious financial trouble who had identified a solution standing 30 feet away from her. But Dee Dee had one skill that outweighed all of that history. She could make people trust her almost immediately. She had a warmth that read as genuine, a directness that felt protective rather than aggressive, an ability to say exactly what a lonely, overwhelmed person needed to hear. She met Abraham in 2008, roughly 2 years after his win. She came to him with a pitch. She wanted to write a book about his life, a sympathetic, compelling story about a poor black man from Frostproof, Florida, who beat impossible odds and changed his family's future. Abraham liked the idea. He liked it even more when Dee Dee began positioning herself as someone who genuinely understood what he was going through. She told him she could manage his finances better than anyone currently around him was doing. She told him the people in his circle were only there because of the money. She told him she wanted nothing from him, that she was simply there to help him protect what he'd built. And Abraham, exhausted, isolated, and quietly desperate for someone he could actually trust, believed her. But what Abraham didn't know was that Dee Dee had done extensive research before she ever introduced herself. She knew how much he had left. She knew exactly how isolated he had become from the people who genuinely cared about him. She had already mapped the distance between Abraham and anyone who might have stepped in to protect him. And she had already started planning her next move. The takeover didn't happen overnight. Dee Dee Moore was patient in a way that, in hindsight, should have been its own warning sign. First, she established trust through competence. She handled small financial matters and handled them well enough that Abraham started to relax around her. She showed up when he needed help and made herself scarce when he didn't. She never asked for anything up front. She made herself indispensable without ever appearing to try. Then, slowly, she started moving Abraham away from the people who knew him best. She told his mother, Elizabeth Walker, that Abraham didn't want contact. She told Abraham that his family was only present because of the money, that the moment it ran out, they would disappear. She created a wall between him and everyone who might have noticed something was shifting. She screened his calls. She filtered his visitors. She became the single point of access to Abraham Shakespeare. Then she got him to sign over power of attorney. With that signature, Dee Dee Moore had legal authority over Abraham's finances. She moved his money into accounts she controlled. She made purchases in his name without his knowledge or direction. She bought herself a $1.1 million home using funds connected to Abraham's assets. She acquired vehicles registered in her name. She funded business ventures using money that had once belonged to a man who couldn't fully read the contracts he had signed. But here's what made this case genuinely different from a typical financial exploitation. Dee Dee didn't just want the money. She wanted to become Abraham. She began speaking for him in public settings. She answered questions that were directed at him. She told people he was tired or traveling or simply didn't feel like talking. The people who hadn't been completely cut off yet started noticing Abraham was harder to reach. His presence in his own life was quietly fading, and nobody connected the dots in time. In April 2009, Abraham Shakespeare was reported missing. He was 43 years old. Dee Dee Moore was the last known person to have seen him alive. And from the moment investigators started asking questions, she had a polished answer for everything. Her first story: Abraham had left voluntarily. He was exhausted by the public attention, she told police. He had decided on his own to vanish and start over somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody knew his name. It was a believable story, because Abraham had actually expressed those feelings to real people in real conversations. Dee Dee had listened carefully to every one of those conversations, and now she was using them as her alibi. But then the stories started shifting. She told one person Abraham was in Texas. She told another he had moved to Michigan. She told a third he had traveled abroad. Each version was delivered with the same convincing calm she brought to everything. She sent text messages from Abraham's phone to his family members, messages carefully written to suggest he was alive, and had simply chosen distance and silence. What investigators didn't know yet was that every one of those messages had been composed and sent by Dee Dee herself. She had his phone. She had his identity documents. She controlled access to his remaining accounts, and she kept talking. Dee Dee gave media interviews. She invited cameras into her home. She sat across from reporters and presented herself as a devastated, bewildered friend who loved Abraham and couldn't understand where he had gone. She even redirected suspicion toward his own family, suggesting they bore responsibility for his disappearance. She had taken his real grievances, the exhaustion, the distrust of family, the desire to escape, and turned them into the supporting structure of her cover story. She knew him well enough to weaponize his own words against him. For months, it worked. The investigation cracked open not because of a single dramatic breakthrough. It cracked open because Dee Dee Moore couldn't keep her stories straight, and because she had underestimated the people she was trying to manipulate. Detectives from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office began cataloging inconsistencies across her various statements. The timeline she provided for Abraham's last known movements didn't match cell tower records. Text messages sent from his phone were traced to locations that directly contradicted what she had told police. Then witnesses came forward. Dee Dee had approached multiple individuals and offered them money, in one documented case, $50,000, to tell investigators they had seen Abraham alive after his disappearance. One witness was asked to claim Abraham was living quietly in the Bahamas. Another was offered cash to tell police that Abraham had made contact from another state. Both refused. Both went directly to investigators instead. But here's the detail that cracked the case at its foundation. Property records showed Dee Dee had purchased a significant quantity of concrete in the weeks immediately following Abraham's last confirmed appearance. Detectives identified a property in Plant City, Florida, connected to a man in Dee Dee's immediate circle. They obtained a search warrant. They brought ground-penetrating equipment designed to detect disturbed earth beneath hardened surfaces. And they started digging. Abraham Shakespeare's body was found in January 2010. He had been buried beneath a concrete slab in the backyard of that Plant City property. He had been shot twice. The medical examiner determined he had been dead since late 2009, meaning Dee Dee Moore had spent months conducting media interviews, planting fake sightings, attempting to bribe witnesses, and actively redirecting an ongoing homicide investigation, while Abraham's body was already sealed beneath concrete less than an hour from where she lived. What made the forensic picture most disturbing was the evidence of deliberate preparation. The burial site was not the result of panic. The concrete had been poured over time, in layers, as a structured concealment strategy. This was not impulsive. This was the final planned step in a process she had been building while she was still sitting across from Abraham, offering to manage his money and protect him from the world. He had survived frostproof. He had survived decades of poverty and a criminal record that had followed him everywhere. He had survived a fraudulent claim on his winning ticket. He had extended generosity to everyone who came to him with a need. But he did not survive the one person who told him she was there to protect him. By the time investigators found him, the $17 million was essentially gone. Dee Dee Moore was arrested in January 2010, the same month Abraham's body was pulled from beneath that concrete slab. Her trial began in 2012. And what the courtroom witnessed over those proceedings was something prosecutors would later describe as one of the most calculated criminal performances they had ever encountered. Dee Dee chose to represent herself during portions of the trial. She cross-examined witnesses. She challenged forensic conclusions. She presented herself to the jury as someone who had been manipulated, threatened, and was now being made a scapegoat for a crime she hadn't committed. Her defense came down to a single claim. Someone else had killed Abraham, and she had been covering for that person out of genuine fear for her own life. But the evidence dismantled every version of that story. The concrete purchases were documented and time-stamped to the day. The fake text messages were forensically traced directly to her own devices. Every witness she had approached and attempted to pay testified against her in open court. Financial records showed a systematic, deliberate transfer of Abraham's assets, the $1.1 million property, multiple vehicles, multiple business accounts, all of it funded by money that had once belonged to Abraham Shakespeare and transferred under the power of attorney he had signed without fully understanding what he was agreeing to. The jury did not deliberate for long. The verdict was guilty of first-degree murder. Doris Dee Dee Moore was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, she still maintained her innocence. She still insisted someone else had pulled the trigger. The judge sentenced her to life regardless. Abraham Shakespeare's money was effectively gone by the time justice was served. His family received no meaningful financial recovery from what remained of the estate. Legal proceedings consumed what little was still traceable. Assets Dee Dee had moved or spent in the years before her arrest were largely unrecoverable through civil action. His mother, Elizabeth Walker, spent years fighting, not just for accountability in her son's murder, but for recognition of how completely the system had failed him from the moment he cashed that ticket. Her argument was simple and devastating. Florida handed Abraham Shakespeare a check for millions of dollars, published his name and photograph in newspapers across the state, and then provided him with zero financial guidance, zero protection resources, and zero warning about the specific dangers that level of public exposure creates for someone with no legal or financial infrastructure of his own. Abraham's case became a recurring reference point in legislative discussions about lottery winner protections in Florida and in states across the country. Several states have since passed or strengthened anonymity laws, allowing winners to claim through a trust or LLC that shields their identity, citing cases exactly like his as justification for the change. Florida has moved slowly. As of recent years, winners can use a trust to partially obscure their identity, but navigating that process requires legal knowledge that Abraham Shakespeare, a man who couldn't fully read, was never going to access on his own without someone guiding him from the moment that ticket was validated. Nobody did that. The state gave him a check. The state put his face in the paper. And then the state walked away. No counselor, no legal advisor assigned, no follow-up call. Abraham Shakespeare won $30 million at 42 years old. He was dead before he turned 44. He never got to spend his money quietly. He never got to experience what financial security actually feels like over time. He never got the chance to make the mistakes and corrections and adjustments that most winners get to make, because the person who positioned herself as his protector made sure he wouldn't get that far. His story is not just a crime story. It is a structural failure, a portrait of what happens when a vulnerable person is handed extraordinary resources in full public view, with no support system, no legal firewall, and no one in an official capacity whose job it is to ask the question, is this person going to be okay? The answer, in Abraham's case, was no. And nobody asked. That silence cost Abraham Shakespeare his life. Abraham Shakespeare couldn't read the documents he signed, but he understood people. He understood what it meant to have nothing, and every time someone came to him with a need, he responded with everything he had. He extended that same trust, that same generosity, to the one person who had already decided he was worth more to her dead than alive. Winning the lottery does not make you invincible. In cases exactly like Abraham's, it makes you the most targeted and exposed person in the room.